Sometimes the path to darkness begins with the purest intentions. The story of Revan stands as one of the most fascinating chapters in the history of the galaxy, not simply because of what Revan became, but because of why. The galaxy was burning. Across countless worlds, the Mandalorians carved a path of destruction unlike anything the Republic had witnessed in generations. They weren't just conquering. They were devastating entire civilizations. Millions dead. Refugee crises spanning dozens of systems. The Republic military struggled to contain their advance. And where were the Jedi during this catastrophe? Watching, waiting, discussing. The Jedi Council sat in their chambers on Coruscant, far removed from the front lines, deliberating while planets fell. Their wisdom, they claimed, told them to stay out of the conflict. The Mandalorian Wars represented a threat beyond simple conquest. The Council sensed something darker lurking beneath the surface. They feared that involvement would lead their members toward the dark side. But for many Jedi, especially a brilliant young knight named Revan, this caution looked like cowardice. This restraint felt like failure. Revan was different from many Jedi, not just in raw power, which was substantial, but in perspective. Where the Council saw dangers that required careful contemplation, Revan saw suffering that demanded immediate action. Where they preached patience, Revan embodied decisiveness. Tall, charismatic, and possessing combat skills that few could match, Revan began speaking out against the Council's position. At first, through proper channels, presenting arguments for intervention. When those failed, Revan's voice grew louder, more public. Soon, other Jedi rallied to this cause, not just the young and impulsive, but respected knights who could no longer reconcile the Jedi commitment to peace with their refusal to defend the innocent. The turning point came when Revan openly defied the Council. Standing before them, Revan declared an intention that would forever alter the course of galactic history. "I will not stand by while the Republic burns. Those who share my resolve will follow." And follow they did. Hundreds of Jedi answered Revan's call, abandoning the Council's mandate of non-intervention. They joined Republic forces as commanders, advisors, and frontline fighters. The Council branded them renegades, but to the military and civilians caught in the conflict, they were saviors. Revan quickly demonstrated why the Force had blessed few beings with such gifts. Military strategy came as naturally as lightsaber combat. Republic officers who initially resented Jedi interference soon found themselves in awe of Revan's tactical brilliance. Battles thought impossible to win suddenly turned in the Republic's favor. But it wasn't just military genius that defined Revan's leadership. It was an understanding of the Mandalorians themselves. While Republic strategists treated them as conventional enemies, Revan recognized their deeper cultural motivations. The Mandalorians weren't fighting for territory or resources. They fought for glory. They sought worthy opponents. And in Revan, they found one. Revan began adapting Mandalorian tactics, becoming increasingly ruthless on the battlefield. Civilians were evacuated from worlds directly in the Mandalorians' path. Then these planets were turned into deadly traps. Republic propaganda portrayed Revan as a hero, but frontline soldiers witnessed the moral compromises. Necessary sacrifices, Revan called them. The Council saw them as steps toward the dark side. The most significant moment in Revan's moral journey came at Cathar. The planet had already fallen to the Mandalorians months earlier, but intelligence suggested something unusual had happened there, something worth investigating. What Revan and the accompanying Jedi found would haunt them forever. On a beach strewn with debris, Revan discovered evidence of a massacre. Not a battle, not collateral damage, but the systematic slaughter of an entire population. Men, women, children. The Cathar species had been nearly exterminated. As Revan processed this horror, something caught this powerful Jedi's attention. A mask, half buried in the sand. A Mandalorian mask. When Revan picked it up, the Force revealed visions of what had occurred. The Cathar had been herded into the sea by Mandalorian forces. One Mandalorian warrior had objected, standing between the victims and their executioners, but was overruled. The genocide proceeded. The mask belonged to that sole objector, whose conscience had not been enough to prevent atrocity. Revan placed the mask over his face and made a vow to never remove it until the Mandalorians had been defeated. The mask became a symbol, not just to the Republic forces, but to the Jedi who followed Revan. It represented their commitment to preventing such horrors, whatever the cost. And the costs kept mounting. With each victory, Revan's methods grew more extreme. More effective, yes, but also more distant from traditional Jedi teachings. When questioned, Revan would ask a simple question: "Would you prefer we lose?" The Council's warnings began to seem prescient. Revan and the closest lieutenants were changing, their compassion becoming selective, their methods increasingly utilitarian. The very thing the Council had feared was happening, but they had no authority over these renegade Jedi anymore. And truth be told, the Republic wouldn't have had it any other way. Revan was winning the war. Throughout all this, Revan's closest friend was a Jedi named Malak. Tall, powerful, and absolutely devoted to Revan's cause, Malak often implemented the most brutal aspects of their campaign. They complemented each other, but those close to them noticed Revan doing less to restrain Malak's excesses as the war dragged on. Year after year, the conflict continued. The Republic pushed the Mandalorians back, reclaiming lost territory. But the Mandalorians fought with the desperation of warriors who preferred death to defeat. The war needed to end decisively. Revan formulated a plan so audacious, so potentially catastrophic, that even many loyal followers questioned it. The plan centered on Malachor V, a planet strong with the dark side of the Force. Revan had been drawn to its secrets, spending time exploring ancient Sith ruins there between battles. Whether those ruins influenced what came next, none can say for certain. What is known is that Revan ordered the creation of a superweapon called the Mass Shadow Generator. The trap was set. Revan personally led the Mandalorian leader Mandalore the Ultimate into battle, engaging in single combat while Republic forces and the Mandalorian fleet clashed around them. As the battle reached its peak, Revan defeated Mandalore, but made a shocking discovery. The Mandalorians had been manipulated into attacking the Republic by a hidden Sith influence. Before this revelation could be processed, the order was given. The Mass Shadow Generator activated. What followed was destruction on a scale that horrified even hardened veterans. The weapon created a gravitational vortex that crushed ships, tore apart the planet's surface, and killed thousands instantaneously. Republic forces, Mandalorian warriors, and even many of the Jedi who had followed Revan perished in moments. The Mandalorian Wars ended that day. The surviving Mandalorians surrendered unconditionally, their culture and spirit broken. Revan ordered their weapons destroyed, their armor confiscated, and their clans disbanded. They would never again pose a threat to the Republic. but the victory felt hollow to many. The Jedi who survived Malachor V were changed, traumatized by what they had experienced. Many lost their connection to the Force entirely, becoming what would later be called wounds in the Force. Others questioned everything they had done, everything they had become, not Revan. While outwardly accepting accolades from a grateful Republic, Revan was already looking beyond the aftermath. The revelation about Sith influence over the Mandalorians raised disturbing questions. Who were these Sith? Where were they hiding? What was their ultimate goal? And most disturbing of all, had the Jedi Council known about this threat all along? The war had transformed Revan from an idealistic Jedi Knight into something harder, more pragmatic. The Jedi teachings of patience, restraint, and compassion seemed naive in the face of such calculated evil. If there were Sith manipulating events from the shadows, then perhaps the traditional Jedi approach was insufficient. Perhaps the galaxy needed protectors willing to use all necessary means to safeguard it. Revan and Malak gathered the most loyal of their remaining forces. Without informing the Republic or what remained of their Jedi followers, they took their fleet and departed into the unknown regions, claiming to be hunting down remaining Mandalorian forces. Their true purpose was to find the source of the Sith influence and eliminate it. When they returned, they were no longer Jedi. The story of how Revan rejected the Jedi Order begins with noble intentions, a desire to protect the innocent, a willingness to act when others would not. But it reveals a fundamental truth about the path to darkness. It rarely begins with a desire to do evil. It begins with the conviction that one knows better than those who counsel restraint. It begins when the ends justify the means. The Mandalorian Wars did not corrupt Revan instantly, but with each compromise, each moral shortcut, each prioritization of victory over principle, something changed. The rejection of the Jedi Order was not a single moment, but a series of steps. Steps taken with the absolute certainty that they were necessary. And perhaps that is the greatest danger of all. Not evil done for its own sake, but evil done in the name of good. By the time Revan stood victorious over the Mandalorians, the Jedi Council had already been rejected in every way that mattered. The only question that remained was what would replace their teachings in the heart of one of the most powerful Force users the galaxy had ever known. The aftermath of war often reveals more about a person than the conflict itself. When the dust settled after Malachor V, the Republic celebrated victory. Civilians who had lived in fear of Mandalorian conquest could finally sleep peacefully. The Jedi Council, while troubled by the methods used, acknowledged that the threat had been neutralized. Everyone expected Revan to return to Coruscant, perhaps to face censure from the Council, but eventually to rejoin the Jedi Order. They were wrong. What the Council failed to understand was that Malachor V had changed Revan fundamentally. The discovery that the Mandalorians had been manipulated by Sith influence created a new perspective. If such an enemy existed in the shadows, then the traditional Jedi approach seemed woefully inadequate. Meditation and patience would not stop a threat that operated through deception and manipulation across decades. Revan began viewing the galaxy through a pragmatic lens that would have horrified the Jedi Masters. If an existential threat lurked beyond known space, then the Republic needed strength, not philosophy. They needed weapons, not wisdom. They needed a leader willing to make difficult choices, not a committee debating ethics while worlds burned. This shift toward pragmatism might have remained just a philosophical disagreement, except for one crucial factor. Revan had tasted real power during the war. Not just military authority, but deeper connections to the Force than the Jedi had ever encouraged. On Malachor V, amid its ancient ruins, Revan had sensed pathways to abilities the Council had declared forbidden. Techniques that could end conflicts before they began. Knowledge that could transform weakness into strength. While publicly claiming to hunt down remaining Mandalorian forces, Revan and Malak took their most loyal followers into the unknown regions. Their true purpose was twofold. First, to find the source of the Sith manipulation. Second, to seek out power that could stand against such a threat. This journey took them to worlds strong with the dark side of the Force. On Korriban, the ancient homeworld of the Sith species, they walked among tombs of long-dead Dark Lords. These ruins contained not just artifacts, but teachings, philosophies that spoke of passion as strength rather than weakness, doctrines that valued decisive action over endless contemplation, ideas that resonated with what Revan had already begun to believe during the war. Each discovery pulled them further from Jedi teachings. Where the Jedi taught that the Force should be respected and worked with, these Sith texts described it as a tool to be controlled and dominated. Where Jedi valued serenity, the Sith valued emotion as fuel for power. Most significantly, where the Jedi served the greater good through self-sacrifice, the Sith doctrine taught that true stability came through strength imposed by the worthy upon the weak. For someone who had watched the Republic nearly fall while the Jedi Council deliberated, these teachings held dangerous appeal. Revan began seeing the Jedi Code as a set of chains that limited potential rather than a wisdom that prevented corruption. The most significant discovery came when Revan and Malak uncovered references to something called the Star Forge. Ancient texts described it as a factory of unprecedented scale, capable of creating entire fleets using the power of a star itself. Built by the long-vanished Rakatan species, it represented exactly what Revan had been seeking, a weapon that could ensure the Republic would never again face extinction. Their search led them to several worlds containing fragments of a star map, each piece bringing them closer to this technological marvel. Worlds that held secrets but refused to share them found themselves conquered. Individuals with knowledge were not asked but compelled to cooperate. The ends increasingly justified any means. Word of these activities eventually reached the Jedi Council. They dispatched messages ordering Revan and Malak to return to Coruscant and account for their actions. These commands were ignored. Next came envoys, fellow Jedi sent to reason with their former comrades. Some never returned. Others came back changed, now following Revan with the same fervor they once showed the Council. The rejection was now mutual. The Council condemned Revan as reckless and dangerous. Revan viewed the Council as blind and ineffectual. This widening gulf pushed Revan toward embracing not just Sith knowledge, but Sith identity. The philosophy that had initially seemed like a pragmatic alternative to Jedi weakness became a true belief system. As Revan delved deeper into ancient teachings, a transformation occurred. No longer was this the noble Jedi who had defied the Council to save the Republic. Revan now saw the Republic itself as flawed, weak, and unprepared for true threats. A system built on compromise and democracy could never respond with the necessary decisiveness. For the galaxy to survive, it needed strength, it needed order, it needed a visionary leader unafraid to wield absolute power. Thus, Darth Revan was born, not through a singular fall to darkness, but through a series of choices, each seemingly justified by necessity. The Mandalorian mask that had once symbolized justice now concealed the face of a Sith Lord. The charisma that had once inspired Jedi to protect the innocent now drew followers to a darker cause. When Revan and Malak finally discovered the Star Forge, it exceeded even their expectations. Massive beyond comprehension, it orbited the star of the Rakata system, drawing energy directly from it to create ships, weapons, and droids at an astonishing rate. With this power, they could build an armada capable of imposing order on the galaxy. They could create a force strong enough to stand against any threat, including the mysterious Sith influence that had started them on this path. The final rejection of Jedi teachings came not with anger, but with cold calculation. Revan no longer saw the dark side as a corruption, but as a necessity. Power did not corrupt. Power revealed. It stripped away illusions and exposed truth. And the truth, Revan now believed, was simple. The galaxy would always face threats. Those threats could only be met through strength, and that strength could only be wielded effectively by those willing to embrace the dark side of the Force. The transformation was complete. Where once stood a Jedi Knight devoted to protecting the innocent, now stood a Sith Lord convinced that true protection required complete control. The path that began with defying the Council to save the Republic would end with attempting to conquer that same Republic to remake it in a stronger image. Revan had not just rejected the Jedi Order, Revan had become its antithesis. The transformation of a hero into something unrecognizable rarely happens in an instant. For Revan, the final step into darkness came during the expedition beyond known space. What Revan and Malak discovered in the unknown regions would forever change them and set the galaxy ablaze with conflict. Their search led them to Dromund Kai's, a world shrouded in dark side energy. There they encountered something they never expected. The Sith Empire, long thought extinct, had survived in exile. At its head stood a being of terrifying power, the Sith Emperor. Ancient beyond comprehension, he had orchestrated events from the shadows for centuries, including manipulating the Mandalorians into attacking the Republic. Revan and Malak, powerful as they had become, were no match for this entity. The Emperor overwhelmed their mental defenses and corrupted their minds with dark side influence. What began as a mission to protect the Republic twisted into its opposite. They returned to known space not as saviors, but as conquerors, now committed to preparing the galaxy for the true Sith Empire by weakening it from within. The Star Forge amplified this corruption. This space station drew power directly from its host star through the dark side. Anyone using it paid a price. The more Revan utilized its capabilities, the more its dark energy fed into an already compromised spirit. The station became both weapon and addiction, offering unlimited military resources while demanding spiritual surrender in return. With the Star Forge producing ships and weapons at an astonishing rate, Revan built a war machine unlike anything the Republic had faced since the Mandalorians. But unlike that previous threat, this new Sith armada operated with calculated precision. Revan applied the same tactical genius that had won the Mandalorian Wars, but now aimed at conquering rather than defending. Worlds fell methodically. Rather than destroying infrastructure as the Mandalorians had done, Revan preserved valuable resources while eliminating resistance. Military targets were prioritized over civilian ones, not from compassion, but practicality. A galaxy ruled by Revan would need these assets intact. This cold efficiency proved more effective than brute force ever could. The Republic, still recovering from the previous conflict, found itself outmatched. Their forces retreated from one system after another. The Jedi, who had once criticized Revan for joining that earlier war, now found themselves the last line of defense against their former champion. Battles between Revan's Sith forces and Jedi defenders became increasingly one-sided as Revan had intimate knowledge of Jedi tactics and weaknesses. What made this conquest truly devastating was how many followed Revan willingly. Veterans who had served under this charismatic leader during the Mandalorian Wars transferred their loyalty to the new Sith Empire. Citizens disillusioned with the Republic's inability to protect them saw Revan as a strong alternative. Even Jedi, especially those who had fought alongside Revan against the Mandalorians, continued to fall under this dark influence. At the heart of Revan's philosophy stood a rejection of everything the Jedi taught. Where they preached emotional detachment, Revan embraced passion as strength. Where they valued patience and careful deliberation, Revan demanded decisive action. Where they sought internal harmony, Revan focused on external order imposed through strength. Each principle of the Jedi Code found its mirror opposite in Revan's new Sith teachings. But the path of the dark side inevitably creates betrayal. As Revan's power grew, so did Malak's ambition. Once a loyal friend and lieutenant, Malik had been changed even more drastically by their encounters in the unknown regions. His capacity for cruelty expanded, while his patience diminished. Witnessing Revan's calculated approach to conquest, Malik began questioning whether his master still pursued victory with sufficient commitment. The opportunity for betrayal came during a Republic ambush. A small team of Jedi led by Bastila Shan, a young Jedi with rare battle meditation ability, managed to corner Revan aboard the flagship. As lightsabers clashed on the bridge, Malik saw his chance. From his own vessel, he ordered his gunners to fire on Revan's ship, intending to eliminate both his master and the Jedi in a single strike. The resulting explosion left Revan critically injured and unconscious. Bastila, rather than leaving her enemy to die, made a fateful choice. She used her Force abilities to preserve Revan's fading life, creating a bond between them. The Jedi strike team escaped with Revan as their prisoner, leaving Malak to assume control of the Sith forces. What followed would be remembered as one of the most controversial decisions in Jedi history. Rather than executing or imprisoning Darth Revan, the Jedi Council chose a different approach. They used the Force to erase Revan's memories, effectively creating a new identity loyal to the Republic. This mind-wiped shell of a once great Force user was then retrained as a Jedi, unaware of a former life as the very enemy they now fought against. This decision would have far-reaching consequences. Though Revan would eventually recover fragments of memory and help defeat Malik, the legacy of rejection endured. Even after being redeemed and returning to the light, Revan's influence continued to shape galactic events. The Jedi Civil War sparked by this fallen knight left deep scars across countless worlds. The teachings developed during Revan's time as a Sith Lord were preserved and studied by future dark side adherents, particularly Darth Bane, who would eventually establish the rule of two that guided Sith philosophy for millennia. Revan's story transcends simple narratives of good versus evil. It speaks to how conviction can become corruption when unchecked by compassion or wisdom. The rejection of Jedi principles began with frustration at their inaction during the Mandalorian crisis. It evolved through pragmatic compromises made during wartime. It culminated in the adoption of a philosophy that mirrored and opposed everything the Jedi stood for. A desire to protect became a need to control. Tactical brilliance devolved into tyrannical ambition. The very strengths that made Revan a hero ultimately paved the path to villainy. Yet many in the galaxy continued to view Revan as both hero and villain simultaneously. The defender who stepped forward when the Jedi would not. The conqueror who brought order through fear. The fallen knight who found redemption. The living embodiment of the thin line between the light and dark sides of the Force. Revan's rejection of the Jedi Order stands as both warning and fascination. It reminds us that even the noblest intentions can lead to darkness when divorced from moral constraints. That power without wisdom becomes tyranny. That the line between necessary compromise and corruption blurs easily in times of crisis. Perhaps most importantly, it demonstrates that our greatest strengths, untempered by balance, often become our most dangerous weaknesses. The same determination that saved the Republic from Mandalorians nearly destroyed it when turned toward conquest. The same charisma that inspired hope later spread despair. The same tactical mind that won impossible victories ultimately engineered brutal subjugation. In rejecting the Jedi Order, Revan became something both more and less than a Jedi Knight, a cautionary legend whose shadow stretches across galactic history, reminding both Jedi and Sith of the consequences when conviction overcomes conscience.